Hey everyone, it's Ed Gutowski. I wanted to talk today to create a kind of a lecture. This is where we're going to shift to the English 94 portion of class. English 94 portion of class basically focuses on some things like basic skills, gives you some structure in your writing. We'll focus on some grammar, and I'll probably try to include an MLA review here as well. You always want to check the English 300 Canvas page, because I'll let you know when we're going to shift gears to focusing on some of the issues that English 94 would deal with as well. Also remember, for part of our class, you also have to enroll in RAC as well as RAD. So what I wanted to do today in this lecture, and what I would like you to do is I'd like you to look at the notes that I have linked in the announcements section that kind of also gives you a brief outlook towards the traditional format for an essay. So I'm going to use this kind of short video to just kind of talk about the traditional format of an essay, and I want to know what you guys think of the traditional format. There are pros and cons to it as well, but there's a couple things you should know about the traditional format for an essay. The first thing is the traditional format for an essay says that whenever you write an essay, you have to start out with a thesis. So we want to define, first of all, what is a thesis? So I'm going to define a thesis for you in two ways. First, I'm going to tell you that a thesis is the most important part of any essay that you write. So anytime you write an essay, the thesis is the most important part of an essay. And that really, if you're writing an essay for an English class or for a history class or a poli-sci class, every time an instructor picks up their essay, they're looking for that thesis statement. And I'll tell you that I define a thesis as when you're given a topic, taking a specific stand on an issue. So I define a thesis as when you take a stand on an issue. And I think the advantage of defining a thesis as taking a stand on an issue is because it gets rid of rambling, right? Students tend not to rambling if you're taking a stand. So let's say I give you the topic of the death penalty. Sometimes students say, I don't know how to feel about the death penalty, right? Sometimes I'm outraged about criminals who commit murder, but yet I'm concerned about, the injustice within the justice system, right? There's some rambling there. Better thesis would be, hey, I support capital punishment or I'm against capital punishment. And notice by having that simple thesis, that basically gives you, a writer, a direction of where you want the paper to go. And for the reader, they can find your thesis. They can say, okay, how do you support that thesis? So I define a thesis as when you take a stand on an issue. So the traditional format says you start off with a thesis, and then after that there's this thing called the divided thesis. I don't want you to worry too much about a divided thesis. I'll kind of explain it as it goes along. The idea behind a divided thesis, you take your thesis and make it into two sentences. And the divided thesis basically is you use this kind of generic sentence that says, in this paper I'll explain 3 reasons why, and then restate your thesis. So once you have your divided thesis, then you merely use the reasons that support your thesis, and you say things like, my first reason is X, my second reason is Y, and my last reason is Z. So let me give you an example that I use when I teach basic skills in English 94 class. I use a really kind of cheesy example, but I say, I want you to imagine that the dean has decided to change our class to 3:30 in the morning. Would you support or would you be against the plan to move our class to 3:30 in the morning? And notice by setting up with that example, I'm sort of setting you up, okay, so take a stand. Do you support having our class at 3:30 in the morning, or would you be against it, right? A weak thesis would be like, I don't know how I feel about having class at 3:30 in the morning. Sometimes I think it's a good idea, other times not. Take a stand. And so when I use this example, and if you were to put that in a traditional format, I get some pretty funny responses from some students. So I one time had a student who said, I support moving our class to 3:30 in the morning. Clear thesis. Then they followed up with the BS sentence that says, in this paper I'll explain 3 reasons why I support moving our class. My first reason is parking wouldn't be a problem. My second reason is I could come straight from work to class. And then my last reason is they'd say something like, hey, I come straight from the bars to class. And notice that last reason is funny, but it's a little inappropriate. But notice what that does within that traditional format is it gives the paper some structure. You have a clear thesis, you have a divided thesis, and you have 3 topic sentences to support your points. What I want you to do is I just merely want you to look over kind of the notes that I kind of posted on Canvas that sort of explains the traditional format, kind of sums up this lecture. And then in a discussion board, I want to know kind of what do you think about the traditional format? Does it work? What are the pros and cons? And then we can go from there discussing it. And I look forward to seeing what you have to write.